This is Tonight with Richard Dean and Tim Elliott, only on DubaiEye 103.8, your source for business.
It's a packed show today, and it's really going to go, I suppose to be fair, it's going to go all over the place. We are talking...
Yeah, it's by design, Tim.
Bubble
We designed
potential.
it to go.
It's absolutely planned. It's meticulously planned, I would say.
It is. We spent all day doing
Down
it.
to the finest detail. You were here slogging at 6
I was.
this
I
morning.
was, yeah. Sweat from the brow, all of that.
Do you know what, though? This is something we wouldn't normally discuss on the programme. We have spoken to Mohammed Harib a couple of times from Frege, who I guess is very well known for his contribution to animation here in the region, as are our next guests. Hani Kishi, Leah Badro and Natalie Habib join us. They're all from Blink Studios. Guys, it's very nice to have you here at DubaiEye. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Now, the reason you're here is to talk about your new venture. Let's just run very quickly through it. Essentially, you are an ambitious team of animators. I'm reading my notes here. And you guys see no reason why the next SpongeBob SquarePants or Ben 10 or whatever cartoon you would choose to name couldn't be made in the Middle East. And I'm absolutely with you. But your new project is going to be called Pearl Hunters. It's inspired by the nation's pearl diving history. And it got me to thinking, it wasn't that long ago. And it's a generation, if that, since... the pearl industry was the industry here certainly in this region, but particularly in this country. It's a fantastic place, I guess, to start. But how does it work? Hani, I'll start with you. In animation terms.
Simply, when you think about an animation program or a new property that you want to create and bring it on screen so the kids or all the people will actually sit and watch, you need to find something that is interesting to actually put on screen. To make it really interesting, you have to have a link between the people, the audience, and the subject itself. And when you talk about the region here, pearl hunting was the main industry in the region and in Dubai or in the UAE. So that's a heritage thing that we wanted to bring back to the screen, however, with a twist. So it's cartoon animation right now. It's not a documentary about pearl hunting. Okay? So what we did is we did a twist. We came up with the idea. We developed it between us to create characters who are coming from this heritage. However, we set the whole thing in the future. So we're talking about the future. Although we're bringing something from the history and the heritage, we're talking about the setting in the future. So we have 4 heroes. Okay, they're learning about pearl hunting. But what is pearl hunting? It's not the same pearl hunting that we're talking about, because we're talking about a twist. Again, animation is about creating heroes that are based on factual stuff, but in a different world. So what we're talking about, a world that is submerged underwater. So most of the cities in the future will be submerged underwater because of too many things, environmental stuff and blah blah blah. So we have our main city that is called Marjan, that is set under the water, and our heroes actually are studying inside the city, and they will discover something that is gonna totally change their future and their life, which is the power of pearl diving. They will discover something that will turn them from a normal students on the water university into something that is bigger than nature. They're gonna be superheroes having superpowers that are inspired by underwater creatures to battle the main evil guy, who's gonna we will know about him later on.
So you're not going to tell us about that now. Do you know what? I'd love to be in one of your creative meetings, because that was just mind-blowing. But you can do that in cartoons, can't you? You can extrapolate and you can go from fact to utter fiction and something that's completely hyper real, I suppose. But this is all underwater, but it's in Dubai, and that's the point, isn't it?
Actually,
I just wanted to mention that it's actually loosely based on the UAE. We don't want to pinpoint where exactly the town or whatever you want to call the city takes place. That's why there's some loosely based cultural references to the UAE without pinpointing to anything. Just as, you have Gotham City and not New York City, you have a similar sort of world that's sort of made from our imagination and using all these fantasy-like elements to create this super world that's set in the future and that's submerged underwater.
So let me ask you, Natalie, you're the business development manager at Blink. Tell me a little bit about the background of Blink. I don't know a great deal about the company. And this is, I mean, really, this is, again, we use this phrase, we used it a couple of times this week, nascent industry, but animation really is in its infancy here in the region.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Actually, we started back in 2005, and when we did, very few people understood the kind of business that we were in. We would go actually to broadcasters and try to sell them our properties, and they wouldn't understand what we were trying to do. For them, it's so easy. Why have to invest into animation when you can buy it off the shelf and just dub it? But the idea and the vision for Blink Studios from day one, as it is today, is to create content from the region. And rather than importing that content into the region, exporting it. That's why a concept like Pearl Hunters, although it's loosely based on cultural insights from the region, it translates to so many cultures around the world. Children in the US, in the UK, in Australia, in Africa can relate to these superheroes. They can actually find the sort of the fun in them as much as a child that lives here and watches it here. So it has nothing to do with the fact that it's just pearl hunting. There is a universal story. And the idea is to prove to this part of the world that you can actually export content, and great content for that matter.
You can, and I guess kids all over the world love a superhero. I still have a thing about tights and underpants over tights, I'll be completely honest. Go on record with that. But I mean,
Well, it's a good job we don't have a camera in here, really,
It
isn't it?
probably is. We have just broadcast that. I need to rewind that bit. But what's interesting is that this is an industry in its infancy, but it's starting to happen. We have Frege, Neighbourhood, which has been extremely successful. You guys doing what you're doing. But it must be incredibly difficult to sell this as a concept to people, because how on earth do you go to somebody and say, well, Pearl Hunters, and it's this, and it's underwater, but it's actually not quite in the past, it's in the future, and it must be difficult.
Well, as you saw Hani's pitch, actually we're very trained to actually do these things. We actually train ourselves to try and get people excited to actually want to support our properties. And when we go out to the international market, we visit the Cannes markets and the markets in New York. We actually do a lot of pitching and we practice for it. And you technically have 5 minutes to convince a broadcaster sitting in front of you that your property is actually worth listening to, let alone considering to actually broadcast on their channel. So it's a huge challenge, but at the same time, it's very exciting and it's very thrilling. I mean, you're out there, you're competing with 30,000 concepts that are coming from different parts of the world. Everybody thinks that they have the winning concept. They have the next Ben 10. They have the next SpongeBob. But the idea is when you actually sit there and you've got your 30 minutes with the broadcaster, it's about telling them you are that next Ben 10 and you are that next SpongeBob. And that's what we've been trying to do with Pearl Hunters, and it's worked. Funnily enough, in the international market, much more than the regional market. That's the funny part. The international market recognizes Blink Studios' work and efforts in trying to create international content. The regional market doesn't understand animation, let alone understand what's the property that we're trying to sell. And this is where it becomes a bit more challenging.
Well, this is this is an area which is really very, very interesting, isn't it? Because Blink Studios, you've been around since 2005, and if memory serves me well, this is not the first project. You've had several projects and lots of experience at pitching overseas and so on and so forth. But why is it, do you think, that you've needed to go overseas? You've touched on the fact that this region doesn't fully understand animation. It would rather buy stuff off the shelf, perhaps from Disney or Pixar, Disney Pixar, one of the other animation houses. Why is it that local animators such as yourselves haven't been embraced before now?
I mean, I think that it's just like all markets and all industries, there's always the starting point. It's always at a point of a premature sort of level, and then it rises and it gets to sort of a plateau and a climax, and then there's this sort of cycle that every industry has to go through, and it's simply a matter of just that we're a bit too late, not we as Blink, but as the industry here in this part of the world. We're just a bit later than everyone else around the world, so that's why it's taking some time for everyone to pick up on the interest in
You
animation.
mean the region's a bit late, not Blink Studios?
No, the region.
Now, the Blink Studios is a bit ahead of its
a bit
time, actually.
As much as we try to say it in all modesty, but we like to believe that we are a bit ahead of, the times of this region, because we are trying to do something that's already being done in the West. It's not something that's unheard of, but in this part of the world, it's just been really difficult trying to convince whether it's broadcasters, investors, or any major players that content is the future, and content and intellectual properties is the future, and you can get a return on your investment. It's not only about real estate projects, hospitality projects, and things that you can, touch at hand and get a quick return on your investment. It is projects like these that can grow like the next SpongeBob or Ben 10 that is homegrown from this part of the world.
Animation, like any other production, takes a lot of talent. Is it an expensive exercise to think about setting up an animation house the way you've done and go into the international marketplace to try and sell what you've created?
I think Hani should be the one to answer that question, because he deals with the talent day in, day out. So,
to start with, yes, it's very expensive. Animation itself is very expensive because it requires a huge team to actually do the production. It's not like, for instance, if you talk about live action, you have the camera and the cameraman, a director telling the guy how to act, and that's it. You got the shot. Here you're talking about someone who's sketching the character, someone who's writing the script, someone who's drawing the storyboard, someone who's animating that, someone who's coloring, someone who's doing the After Effects thing. So it's really we always say that animation is the most collaborative work ever on earth, simply because, for instance, if you talk about one of the animated feature films, you're talking about around 200 to 300 people working for 2 years just to get 1 hour of animation or 1 hour and a half on the big screen. So it is very expensive.
How have you been accepted overseas? I know you mentioned earlier you've been to Cannes and you've been to New York and various other places. So how are you being accepted as a production house?
We're perceived basically to be truly the leader in what we're trying to do in the Middle East. And that wasn't a recognition that we got overnight. A lot of investment of time and money was put behind that. We were actually, we grew our reputation in the international market slowly but surely. And it was one of the most difficult things to do, because other than the fact that we were trying to sell our property, we were trying to convince people that we can actually produce fantastic animation. The benchmark is very high in the rest of the world. And we got that opportunity when we actually were commissioned to produce the preschool show Driver Dan Story Train for the BBC, as well as for Al Jazeera Al Baraim preschool channel. And that was a great opportunity, and it actually added to the proof that we can actually do this job. And of course, not to speak of our short film Ustura, which got 28 international nominations. It was an Arabic 2D cutout animation in 3D stereoscopic. So it was a great achievement and the proof of the fact that we can actually produce international quality.
Do you know what? There's an awful lot more to talk about here. Would you guys stay around for just another few minutes? Would you mind? Have you got anything better to do? Say no. It's fine.
No problem.
Hani Kishi, Layla Badro, and Natalie Habib from Blink Studios are in our studio at the moment, talking about, among other things, Pearl Hunters, which is a new animated series. It's a project inspired by the nation's pearl diving history. More on that and more after a break.
This is Tonight with Richard Dean and Tim Elliott, only on DubaiEye 103.8. We mean business.
We're here in the studio this evening with Hani Kishi, Layla Badro and Natalie Habib, who they're all from Blink Studios, which is an animation company, outfit here in Dubai. Their new project is going to be called Pearl Hunters. It's a series inspired by the nation's pearl diving history. It's an action-adventure story. Hani, you described it far better than I could ever hope to. We'll get back to it a little bit later on, I guess. But I'm really interested in, the fact is, you've not just come from nowhere. You've been around since 2005, and I'm interested in some of the projects that you've had success with so far. Natalie, you mentioned a BBC commission just now.
Yes, absolutely. It was actually through 2454's creative venture when they went and they bought the rights for one of the preschool shows called Driver Dan Story Train. And they went shopping around for animation studios. Funnily enough, they came across Blink Studios from the international market. So they went knocking on broadcasters and said, hey, we're looking for an animation studio in the Middle East to produce our show. They're like, why don't you go check Blink Studios? So they took a very long turn to come back to us, but it was a great partnership for 2 years where we produced up to 104 episodes, which were also adapted in Arabic for Al Jazeera. And it was the actual opening door to producing long-form TV series. And obviously just a proof in the pudding that we actually can produce fantastic animation, not just pitch it well. And this is exactly what we did with Driver ever done.
Because, this is something that really needs to be sold, and we touched on this a couple of minutes ago, didn't we? That it's a young industry, it's in its infancy, it's a hard thing, but you need to sell your product to people. It's a tough road. Or you're not Toy Story yet, you're not Pixar yet. Mm-hmm. Although one day, you never know. Let's be optimistic, I suppose. Talk to me about talent in this market. We mentioned off air just now, and I'll briefly go back to that at Comic-Con this year. I looked at some of the animation talent there, some of the storyboarding that was on display, and it wasn't just superheroes walking around handing out cards. There was some real local talent on display. Seemed to be honest, Layla, mainly young Emirati women, I have to say, but there is talent in this region.
Absolutely. We've come across various artists in all the different departments from when we first started. And although it has been very difficult in the beginning to get those artists, we slowly built our core team, which we are happy to say are still with us to this day. And they've pushed on with us, and we've been through the good and the hard times, but we've always also looked to expand and contract our team according to the different sort of requirements. But we did come across so much talent in the past couple of years, especially that now it's becoming more of a recognized industry and more acceptable for young people to just to pursue that kind of career and to study or to take courses in anything to do with the media. So whether it's storyboard artists, sketch artists, 3D and 2D animators, even in music, composition, editing, there's so many different aspects to a production, and it's good to see that there's a lot of talent out there. And through the most recent projects, we've been able to tap into some of them, mostly the local market, which we have done in Ustura, which is our short film that Natalie was speaking of earlier. And we had the opportunity to work with a lot of talent that were considered amateur, but they were taking on their first steps of being part of a production pipeline, which was very interesting for them, and as well as for us to see the different styles of talent that's out there. We also just wanted to add that we also take a lot of pride in keeping our team to be mostly Arab-based, so that we are helping the talent in the Middle East and trying to keep everything in-house, which is something that's also very rare for animation studios in this part of the world.
And just to elaborate a little bit further on that, the reason why we're nurturing Arab talent in the Middle East is because other industries, animation industries in different parts of the world, if you're talking about the US, North America, Australia, the Far East, or Europe for that matter, they have an industry. They have opportunities. There are so many studios. There are broadcasters who are supporting new content, and they get the opportunity to work on projects, whereas here you've got sort of a misbalance, because you've got a lot of talent that is rising, but you don't have enough opportunities for them to actually be part of. And when it comes down to the Emiratis, it's a fantastic pleasure and surprising one to find out that there's so much talent within their circle. And we were very happy to work with them in Ustura, because they actually helped bring Ustura to life. And that is one of the great things that we've discovered along the way as we actually started nurturing more and more our talent.
It's amazing to see where talent comes from, isn't it? I mean, as you pointed out there with what you were saying about Emirati talent, and you also mentioned some of the big international producers as well. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the credits on some of those international producers, they're not producing homegrown stuff at all. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, they're outsourcing a lot of their talent, or getting a lot of their talent from different parts of the world. What you've done, though, is something quite different. What you've said is that you've focused here. You're based here and you're focusing here. You haven't outsourced to perhaps less expensive areas to get your animation done, to get your storyboards done, to get the stories written and produced. You're doing everything yourself. So you truly are a UAE company which is set to export the talent from the UAE to the rest of the world. Is this something that you set out to do? Was that part of what you wanted to do? Or did you start from purely the idea of wanting to be great animators? I mean, it's a serious question.
Actually, it went through stages. In the earlier days, we had to import all the talent. In what sense? We need to learn what would take to actually grow a successful animation studio. So a lot of consultants were brought in from different parts of the world, mainly the US, to teach us about how to actually produce fantastic animation. But then the wheels turned. Once we got that information, it was our job, and we took that as a very conscious decision.
That's a bit like the Master's Apprentice.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely.
I happen to know some of the people that consulted to you, so and I've seen what you've done since.
So the idea was to actually now transfer all this knowledge and talent to different parts of the Middle East, and it was something that we consciously took a decision to do, which is to support and nurture talents from here, just to allow opportunities for people to actually feel that their talent can actually be put to great use. That was the idea.
Well, just finally, well, maybe not finally, but looking at okay, you're going into this area of production now, which you've been doing for some time, but you've also been commercial, haven't you? You've also produced things for private companies from corporate work and also smaller productions as well, using the talents inside the company. Is that something that you will retain as well as doing some feature work?
We
just want to add one thing. That's just to pay the bills. I just wanted to flag that.
Oh gosh, I had no idea you had bills.
Simply, we have to keep the commercial arm working and not to stop any commercial projects that we have in the pipeline, because at the end of the day, as Natalie mentioned, we have to pay the bills. And actually, those commercial projects, whatever money that we're getting from those, we are feeding our new adventures into creating new content, okay, through that money.
So you're playing that back into new talent,
Exactly.
All
new
the
productions.
time.
Exactly.
All the time.
There's always like a dual role that we all play. We play the commercial arm, trying to pay the bills, trying to get the projects, and then we have the part where we're just being creative and crazy and just letting loose, and then just coming up with the best ideas that we can. And so trying to keep the balance between those two has always been what we do.
Do you know what? We've run way over time for the news, but I've just been sat listening. Tell me very quickly, you pitched to Cartoon Network Arabia, Al Jazeera, NBC3 for Pearl Hunters. When is Pearl Hunters going to be out? Where are we going to be able to see it? Or where do you think, or can you not tell us? Would you have to shoot me if you told me?
No, as soon as we find somebody to pay the bills, then we'll let you know when Pearl Hunters is coming out.
Always comes down to the bills, doesn't it? Hani Kishi, Layla Badro and Natalie Habib, all from Blink Studios. It's been a real education talking to you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.